or loving kindness is a practice, I think, very important in modern society, because this modern life tends to be based on like criticisms and examining what's wrong. And so, most of us are educated and culturally conditioned to think always in terms of what's wrong with something, with oneself, or with America, or with other people. And so metta is a skillful means that it's like it's an all-embracing, it's non-critical. Like your critical faculties are, you compare, this is better than that, and this is bigger and smaller, this is smaller, and this is what I like, and that's what I don't like. I mean, that kind of mental function we develop. And but metta is non-discriminating. I mean, it's aware of differences, but it's not emphasizing what's wrong or that anything's better than anything else. It's an interesting way to develop conscious experience, and it's not just a kind of refusing to look at what's wrong with anything. It's not denying differences or qualities being different, but it's the practice of not grasping, not making a problem, not dwelling on what's wrong. So that's why you can spread metta to the forces of evil, or the enemy. You can have metta for your enemy. Which means that the enemy still maybe wants to kill you, but you're not developing aversion. You're not dwelling on that, and then you're say sending blessings or goodwill even to the enemy and to the forces of evil. And so, like the word love itself is important to see how you want to define that word, because it's used in so many different ways. And it's a very powerful word in the English language. And kind of maudlin and as overworked as it tends to be, it's still a very powerful word. And we need to know what we mean by it, because we oftentimes we're not very clear in our thinking. So we can say we love something, which means that maybe we like something. No, liking is what liking and disliking is one thing, isn't it? You don't like your enemies usually, and you don't like the forces of evil. So we're not saying metta is saying I like evil and I like my enemies. Because to like something means it has to have something pleasing to you, something that appeals to you, that attracts you. And forces of evil, or your enemies, or the ugly things, or the meanness, or the malicious forces, or the nastiness of the world is impossible to like it. but we can love, and this is what we mean by metta. So metta is being patient, accepting, not dwelling in aversion. And this is something we can train ourselves to develop. In Christianity, they call it Christian love, isn't it? Where you love your enemies and so forth. I mean, in terms of Christian love, or they define it in terms of, or unconditional love. Unconditional love is another term for it. But don't think of it, love in some kind of, grand emotion of approving and liking, because we can love that which we don't approve of and that which we don't like at all. And how do you do that? One thing, by not trying to curse it or send bad vibrations. Not trying to, not murdering somebody who hates you and wants to murder you is a form of love. And not dwelling in aversion, not even though you might feel averse, not cultivating aversion and resentment toward that being or that person. So it's a patience, being patient, accepting means that accepting the way it is, rather than, it doesn't mean approving, but accepting the forces of evil the way they are, without saying, I'll only accept you if you change your ways and conduct yourself in the way I like. Then we're putting conditions on it. I'll love you only when you make yourself likable to me. Then it's not unconditional. That's also a way of dealing with your own negativity. The negative emotions you have that you don't like. And of course, not liking these emotions means that we tend to, we tend to blame ourselves, or we make it into a problem. So with metta is not dwelling in aversion, not hating, accepting and being patient with what we're feeling, which may be not very nice at all. So that's a good practice, to learn how to bear with, accept and be patient, and not create aversion around the unpleasant things that you're feeling inside your own in your mind or in your body, or the things around you. So metta is, as we can see in metta practice, all beings, seen, unseen, all possibilities, of all types, all qualities. So what does that do to your mind when you're, it's the totality, isn't it? It's total. It's everything. And see where discrimination tends to, and criticism tends to, you pick and choose, and this is good and that's bad, and you're dividing up everything in a way that I like this and I don't like that. This is I approve of and this I don't. This is right and that's wrong. So that's a divisive function of the mind. I'm not criticizing that either. We need to have that, but when that's our only way of relating, then of course we suffer all the time, because we have to share and live in a universe where, a lot of it we don't like, and it's unlikable. A lot of life is not likable. It's not just you. Just the way it is. So just pointing out the difference between, say, discrimination, comparing, weighing one thing against another, and this metta which is all-inclusive, a total acceptance, unconditional love for everything, everyone. So this is when you train the mind with metta, then that changes your attitude. You find a way, say, of bearing with the unpleasant, the unwanted, the painful, the ugly, the evil, the mean, the nasty, the disgusting, all the rest of it. You can. Otherwise, we're just caught in being angry or hating it or just avoiding, or we develop neurotic habits and all kinds of ways of just trying to say avoid looking at something bad, or feeling very threatened or feeling averse, because life presents us with things that are ugly and unfair and mean and nasty. And we create these things in our minds too, and we can create pretty ugly emotions and thoughts. So in terms of metta, we always start with ourselves. May I abide in well-being. So it's this. Starting with this, we're learning to accept the way you are and the conditions, good or bad, that you're experiencing emotionally or intellectually or physically, instinctually. And so it's sending goodwill to yourself. But this, and this isn't just a sentimental thing, but it's working in a way that is quite subtle in learning to just not be self-critical, not to just develop, dwell on what's wrong, but even have patience and acceptance even towards those tendencies, your own critical tendencies. It works in every subtle way. Like weaknesses or cowardliness or things that we hate ourselves for. Like say if we're cowardly, then we hate ourselves for that. Or if we're jealous, and we tend to hate ourselves for being jealous or feeling jealousy. Or if we're trying to be good people and moral and fair and just, and then we find ourselves feeling really mean and mean-hearted or jealous, or we act in inferior ways. We do bad things or say bad things, and we can hate ourselves for that. So metta is also, rather than then dwelling and getting obsessed with this self-hatred and self-criticism is clearly not metta even for cowardice and jealousy and weakness and stupidity and all these things we hate. Doesn't mean we like or approve, but it means we're not making a problem about it. We're willing to accept those conditions for what they are. And so that I find a very helpful attitude in my own practice over the years, because there was a tendency to really get hard on myself, really hate myself for things that I felt I shouldn't be. And so there's always a struggling, trying to get rid of things and trying to, and then the more you struggle and try to control, manipulate your mind, and then you fall back in the same old patterns, and then you hate yourself again, and you just don't seem to get anywhere with it. So if just hating yourself was some way to solve the problem, then that would be the thing to do. But it doesn't. It doesn't solve the problem. It doesn't help. It just makes you more miserable. Learning to accept others for what they are. That's another one. Accept oneself and accept others for what they are, with their warts, their pimples, their bad breath, all the rest. That's a difficult one, isn't it? Because we sometimes we want to change people, make them, there's in many of us a desire to, if somebody has bad habits and is irritating and frustrating us, and that we might want to help them by trying to get them to change, to act in a way that doesn't upset us. But that seldom works, too. So I mean, this metta doesn't mean approving. If somebody's got bad habits and they're really bad habits, not just because they irritate us, because they are bad habits. Having metta, it means that we're willing to accept that. Our love for them is unconditioned. We aren't going to love them only if they change their bad habits. So this helps us too then get some perspective on how we oftentimes, how narrow-minded we can be, and how demanding we are of others. Like I'll accept you only if you conduct yourself in a way that I approve of. And that you have to be worthy of my love. You have to prove yourself. My love is so great and so good that only the very best are going to get it. I'm such an important person that my love is really, you've got to really work hard to deserve it, is very conceited, isn't it? Yet sometimes that's how we act, isn't it, towards people. Other people. Also, this helps you to expand your mind into like a totality, because metta is the totality. Then it's universal. It has no limits, no boundaries on it. Or narrow-minded, I only love you when you're moral, when you practice hard, when you smile at me, when you act in the right way, when you're polite, when you conduct yourself in a way that I approve of. And then of course that's all the conditions I'm placing on you. And then I can only love you when you're doing all that. But as soon as you one misstep, and then that's it. One mistake, one cross word, one dirty look, and you've had it as far as I'm concerned. So this, of course, takes patience to be able to bear with this, because we have to learn how to take things, how to take the bad stuff from other people and not hate them for it, how to accept the rubbish, the refuse, the excrement that people throw at it, without hating them, or hating the excrement. That's a big order, isn't it? But yet we can do it with mindfulness and with patience and with the metta. And so like Ajahn Chah used to say, you have to make yourself into a rubbish tip, into a garbage can. I'm trying to learn American words again. Into a garbage can. And they don't say that in England. Garbage can. Make yourself into garbage disposal. And he said it quite seriously, And first I thought, well, I don't want to be just, I don't want people to dump their garbage into me, and if you've got problems, and it's you. Don't dump it onto me. Was how I used to feel. But then I can see that mental state was, don't dump your rubbish on me is it's still, a selfish reaction. Don't hurt me. I don't want to know. I don't want to have anything to do with your suffering or your problems. When I was a neighbor, we used to say, "Go tell the chaplain." But then contemplating this is also I could see that there was in myself a real fear of that, and just not knowing how. And also there's a sense of I've got to defend myself against the world. I've got to protect myself. I've got to keep my guard up and keep all these enemies and these potential enemies, or that at a distance, just to protect myself, so that one becomes very frightened and fearful of life and other people, because people can hurt you, people can dump their rubbish on you, people can hurt your feelings, people can offend you, they can insult you, they can wound you, they can shatter you, they can kill you. So I mean, we are very vulnerable. We're in a state where we can, physically and emotionally, very vulnerable state. But taking that vulnerability rather than as something to protect and to kind of build a fortress around yourself, the spiritual path is by allowing yourself to be totally vulnerable. That's one reason why spiritual development is frightening, because it is like it's an act of faith, and it's taking down all the defenses and fortress walls and all that you've built up over the years. But then the miracle of it is when you're completely vulnerable, then you're also invulnerable. It means that we can process the suffering of the world. It's like we can digest it and we can take it, we can transmute it. But we can't do. But if we're always in a state of defensiveness and protecting ourselves and fear and anxiety, then we make ourselves suffer all the time, even with our friends, even when everything's all right. Isn't it? We're still stuck with a lot of fear and anxiety about the possibilities. So this way, metta also is learning to trust and to experiment and willing to feel the suffering of the world. That's why feeling your own suffering, why I keep saying, reiterating this over and over again. Don't be afraid to suffer. Accept what you're feeling. Embrace it. I use this gesture. Embrace. Or like the angry man that says, Ajahn Sumedho, I want to have a talk with you, like that. And then you feel it and immediately the conditioned reactions is, I don't want to talk with you, I want to get out of here. Let me out of here. But then a determination, a deliberate willing or determining to accept this man's anger actually resolved the problem. It helped him and it helped me. We both benefited from it. He benefited and I benefited. So he dumped his anger onto me and I swallowed it, and I became a stronger person, stronger and more trusting, because I realized how to do it, how to accept, how to take on something that before I would have rejected. So like in Mahatma Gandhi, was in his methods, was also into this, accepting the beatings or the floggings or the injustices, say at that time in India. They're to try to expel the British. Or they're being looked down on as a black person, or being despised, or all these things is the rubbish, the garbage that gets dumped on people. But it's also, say, to be something that we can use, and we transmute it from being just rubbish into metta, more loving kindness. And of course then we're much more, then we become fearless individuals. And we know we can take it. Whatever happens to us, we can take it. Or the Christian example of crucifixion. Isn't it? Jesus crucified on the cross. It's a pretty horrible thing to do to anybody. And then they're making fun, jeering and insulting him. Put a crown of thorns on his head saying, "King of the Jews, ha ha ha, look at you." Mean, nasty, insulting, right? Being naked on a cross and made fun of. I mean, worst things that could happen. Horrible. And then the forgiveness, isn't it? He forgives them, and he doesn't, and he accepts what they're saying, and surrenders to the cross. So that's a very powerful example in the Christian icon. Then there's in the Buddhist sutras, the Buddhist says to his disciples, if the demons get you and they start torturing you in the most horrible way you can imagine, and you have one negative thought towards those demons, you are not a disciple of the Buddha. So imagine, demons got you, they're red hot pokers going down your throat, pulling out your fingernails, gouging out your eyeballs. Horrible things going to every orifice of your body. Pain, humiliation, and you're not supposed to have one negative thought. Well, these are extreme examples. But, and I don't think that any of us will be crucified, or that hopefully none of us, we won't be tortured either. But in daily life, what do we do? With the little things, before they start sticking red hot pokers down your throat, just somebody pushing you, or somebody insulting you. What do you do with that? See? So I mean, this is where we bring attention to this, in daily life. Work on the things of the daily irritations, daily life irritations, frustrations. The little bitty unfairnesses and exasperating experiences, and lack of courtesy or disrespect or insensitivity that people show towards us. It doesn't mean we're putting on a nice face, a stiff upper lip kind of thing, but we're willing to feel the hurt of life, our own pain and the pain of somebody else. Last year we were building this temple in England, and so we had to get permission to build this temple. And when we acquired Amaravati 10 years ago, the council was implied that there would be no problem in building a temple. So when we applied, we expected to get permission, and then there were some people in the area that objected, and so they had this campaign against us to refuse this building of the temple. So we had to go through kind of public relations exercises and trying to inform people, and still there's this kind of resistance by certain kind of entrenched Tory type right-wing You know the type. Anyway, we had to go to an appeal, and so I was to be one of the chief witnesses on this appeal. And so this was something that I've never wanted to ever do. I dread this kind of thing, going like legal, being a witness or anything in a legal case. And here I was, asked to be the chief witness in this appeal. And so we had about 6-7 months to prepare our case. And so I noticed every time the word appeal came up, just the word appeal, which before didn't upset me in any way, suddenly I'd feel this pain in my gut. I feel on each side, right down here in the abdomen, the physical pain. Just you say the word appeal and I get And so then somebody say, it's the appeal's in November and it's August. Feel this thing. Ajahn Sumedho, do you have time today? We've got to prepare for this appeal. So I'd contemplate this pain, just the physical pain that I thought, well, that's something quite easy because it's very physical. And I didn't want to have to think about this appeal. I didn't like having to be a part of it or involved with it, much less being the chief witness. But had to be done, and so I used this deliberately, taking the pain I was feeling trying to totally accept the situation, both their side, our side, everything about it, and to use metta with it. And so, actually, by the time the appeal came, that pain wasn't there. Actually, it didn't bother me at all to be a chief witness, but it was through a willingness to use the situation, both the physical pain, the emotional dread, and also the metta for the people who are the opposing side, which was also very difficult because some of them, one felt quite indignant or felt very, we'd been deeply offended and misunderstood, and it was terribly unfair. But even that, we accept, we're patient, accepting of it, learning to feel it, learning to feel that sense of it's unfair, and accept that feeling rather than being caught up into hating and developing a hatred towards the people that are being unfair. So then metta is like patience, willing to endure, willing to bear with the pain of this realm. With meditation also, a lot comes up in your mind, doesn't it? Just a lot of memories and a lot of unconscious emotions will start becoming conscious. And so like metta for that also means acceptance and patience, willing for them to be what they are without reacting as I want to get rid of them. I don't want these emotions. In monastic life, I can see, like in a community, for example, in a monastic community, you have to live together quite, day after day, month after month, year after year sometimes. And And you accept whoever is willing to live under the discipline. It's not a matter of whether you personally like them or find them easy to get on with, or that you're your kind of people. If they're willing to live under the discipline, then you let them in, you accept them. So you have to live with people, some people that I found very frustrating for me. Because the way they react to things is very different, or they just have very irritating habits, or they just bring up all kinds of emotions, and you think, if I were a lay person, I would never, if I could choose, I would never choose these people as my friends. And I would have just, ignored them if I had, but in the monastic life, you're kind of stuck with them all. So, then I could see as a lay person, I was much more kind of picky and fussy, and I just kind of selective, and these and not those, and then it was because you can do that as a lay person. You have your own home. You can go and close the door. You can shut people out. But when you're in a monastery, we all belong in the monastery. So also, like Ajahn Chah would say, I remember when we established the Wat Banana Cha, in that first year, I was the abbot of that monastery the first 2 years, and I was just learning, because I'd never been an abbot of any monastery, or even a proper teacher, and suddenly I was teaching, abbot, everything was on my shoulders. And I felt really burdened and ill at ease, because when you've never done these things, you just, you're kind of fumbling around, and oftentimes you don't do things very well at first. So then there was one monk that was giving me a really difficult time. Whatever I said, he'd go against it. And he'd get really angry with me. And one time I remember we were reading a Vinaya text, and I was reading the Vinaya text, and he had this, and it's supposed to be, a monk, if it's hot there, and there was no air conditioning, so they take the fan and kind of, fan you. So this monk was angry with me, and he was kind of like and then he'd give me these blood-curdling looks. And I go back to my kuti at night, my little hut in the forest, and I'd have nightmares thinking I could see him coming with a machete, cut my head off. So I went up to see Ajahn Chah one day, and I was telling him about it, and so he said, well, this is your sharpening stone. Sharpening stone for his machete, maybe. But this is your sharpening stone. You have to have people like this for wisdom. Be grateful for them rather than just try to get rid of them. Because I used to think, if I can get rid of this monk, then it'll be all right. But that doesn't work. It's not a matter of just getting rid of people that you can't get on with. When it's learning how to open wider, learn how to bend more, how to accept, how to work with life, rather than trying to control it. Before, I'd always tried to control everything, so that I had a kind of way of getting by, getting through life through kind of manipulations and controlling situations and avoiding situations that I found difficult. But this was like being right in the middle of it, where there was no way I could, to control the situation wouldn't work. So I had to develop skillful means, had to expand, had to use wisdom rather than just cleverness in dealing with the problems of communities. And that's a metta practice then, is this word, loving kindness. Kindness is what? Being kind. And you can be kind to the nastiest people. Or learning to be kind even to annoying things like mosquitoes and flies, and slugs, things like that. Accepting. In Thailand was a good place to develop loving kindness because you had to live with a lot of irritating creatures like insects and reptiles. I remember, because of bhikkhu, Buddhist monk, we can't kill animals of any sort, insects or reptiles, anything. We can't kill anything. So, and then in Thailand, it's like an anthill. They've got ants everywhere and termites. So you've always got to learn how to cook, and mosquitoes, lots of mosquitoes. But all that, those 10 years I spent in Thailand as a monk, this was before I understood what termites, how they operate, but they have these termite migrations. A whole kind of hive or nest of termites will suddenly decide to migrate somewhere else. And so, and oftentimes if your kuti is in the way, then they cross the kuti, you see. So remember one night I was very tired and I came back to my kuti and the whole place was covered in termites. And I thought, oh God, the termites are here, they're going to eat my kuti. And so I started trying to sweep them out. I mean, they were everywhere. They were in the rafters and everything. And then their termites have soft little bodies, so that if you sweep them, you can smash them. So that didn't work, just trying to kind of clear them out. And so the only thing to do was, if I was so tired, I'll go sleep somewhere else. So I went to sleep somewhere else that night, thinking the next day, what am I going to do? They're in my kuti now. I had these visions that they would, the termites eat wood and they would eat the whole kuti. I would have any kuti. But the next morning I went over there and they were not one in sight. And they were just passing by. Probably just saying, hi, Sumedho. Here I was, hating them and trying to figure out how to get rid of them. So not even appreciating a friendly greeting. But it's these kind of experiences, isn't it, that we learn. The gnats, the little ticks, and the parasites, and the mosquitoes, and all the rest. The metta for these it helps us to just be more patient and more beautiful in our heart. Because I found myself a nicer person when I started thinking how to coexist with the creatures on this planet, rather than how to control this planet so that it doesn't irritate me. And there's something really awful about that, isn't there? Trying to make this planet into a place that doesn't frustrate, irritate me, or upset me in any way is a really selfish, nasty attitude. But then how to coexist with everything on this planet. Helps us to, because then we develop patience, patient endurance. That's something we can't get enough of, to be patient. And metta, unconditional love. And these are spiritual virtues that enhance and direct us toward spiritual realization. So, are there any questions?
I think these teachings are very helpful. I think that they become very complicated in certain situations where, for example, a husband is beating his wife, a girl is being abused by her father. Patience and acceptance. Things can escalate.
Well, it's, I mean, I can't speak for that because I've never, those things haven't happened to me, but patience isn't a kind of passive fatalism, but it's a positive, willing to bear with the suffering of who's beating you, and your own suffering. So in that way, it's not just a kind of a tail between the legs, cowardly feeling, or just a kind of fatalistic resignation to misery, but it's a very positive thing. It speaks loudly. But it's not blaming and it's not resentful. Well, say when somebody's been abused by a parent, then it tends to get, a lot of fear and a lot of resentment. Those are extreme situations, and it would take a real saint to, to put up with it. But it's also worth considering. Also, it can be, it doesn't mean that you can't say stop it or defend yourself. But the defense and the questioning isn't done out of, hatred, but out of love. So that, when I've noticed that, like the world, say the ignorant world operates on a conditioned process taking place. And I had this insight one time where, when I was a junior monk, there was the monk. He was just about a year or so senior to me in terms of being a monk, and he a Thai monk, and he was had a very kind of bad complexion, and he was not very good looking, and he seemed to have no confidence, and he wasn't a very, you could see he wasn't a very inspiring specimen, and so he tended, and I felt sorry for him, so I befriended him and talked with him, and not many people would talk to him and things like this. So because he sat next to me, I would take a special interest in him. And then one time, we were standing outside the dining hall, and he came up to me, and he was kind of standing nearby and trying to get my attention. And I felt this incredible desire to kick him. And it was shocked me that I would feel it, because intellectually I wouldn't want to do that. But then I began to notice that the way he was standing and his body language was like he was cowering in a way. And I don't think he knew it wasn't intentional, but he had a kind of cowering pose. And it brought up some kind of basic instinct, some kind of animal, more brutal instinct. So this is, you can see just sometimes we trigger off things just through, he's probably beaten. I mean, I wouldn't surprise if he had been beaten as abused as a child, but he also tended to, just the way, because of the conditioning process, then his attitude was also one that tended to bring that kind of reaction to him. Then, and this is what conditioning is. I mean, it's just so. If you watch dogs, like in Thailand, the dogs, like we had I remember in one monastery, there was this dog that lived in the monastery, and in the early morning, we monks would go out on alms round into the villages, and this dog used to like to come. But you see, when a dog, they have their own rules about things, and so they're territorial. So the village dogs, when they see my dog, they'd all start ganging up on him. But my dog was very clever. You know what he'd do? When the dogs would start running at him, he'd put his tail between his legs and cower. And then they'd leave him alone. And then he'd cower through the village like this. And then as soon as outside the village, he'd be back with his tail out in the air. And on to the next one. He knew how to operate in the dog world. Well, that was just how dogs work. How they approach each other. So I mean, and so human beings aren't oftentimes any different. We have the same kind of instinct as the animals, and we oftentimes operate, on that level too. But this is where, but we have a choice. We don't say we can change that. You see, so this is why with meditation we're actually trying to rise above those kind of animal instincts, not through aversion or to put them down, but to recognize that we can operate on a higher level, on a finer level. So like metta is universal. It's divine. It's lifting us up to a higher level than just, say, survival of the fittest, or just the games that one's learned to play in order to survive or get on in an ignorant society. Yes?
I think that just culturally, women have very often taken on the role of garbage dump, and that the notion, and that it's never been liberating. I mean, very few women would say that it's been liberating or expanding or anything like that. And as I imagine other women consider what this teaching means, it's pretty tricky territory to think about how to rise above, or how to feel metta and loving kindness toward somebody dumping, and have a long history of that not being positive. I guess my point is, I think that you're talking about something very different and more powerful, but I find that territory very
But that's I mean, it's not a kind of it's not like being like well, what I think women have done is kind of become fatalistic,
And could you talk more
kind of
about
resigned to a bad deal, and was a bit filled with resentment about it.
Unconscious a lot of times, or repressed too.
Yeah. Where this is accepting both because you're aware of your own emotional reaction. You're not just trying to I've got to it's not trying to be a martyr or just just try to ignore it or not feel. But it's a metta is like this universal, unconditioned love, which applies to both your own feelings, like resentment, like I was telling you the other day about resentment, having to work with resentment, and it wasn't trying to get rid of it. I mean, or just being stiff upper lip and don't be so silly. Sumedho, just get on with your life and bear with it, kind of thing. It was willing to really admit the resentment and to listen to it and to accept it, which is different than just say, well, life is tough, just get on with it and keep going, stiff upper lip, grin and bear. And which is a kind of, a fatalistic, put on a smile even though inside you're really hurt, which doesn't work. It leads to all kinds of physical and emotional suffering. But the thing, to try to use it in a very simple way, and not to, in some way when you're talking about universal it sounds so grand, but working with it with just little things. So you can kind of, you get confidence with it, because once you understand how to really do it, then it's really wonderful. And not that you always can do it all the time, but you see how, you can do that. Because also one needs to, there's accepting the rubbish from others, but there's also, we also need to let others know what they're doing and how it affects. So there needs to be a kind of mutual honesty. Some people will listen, others won't. But like in community life, for example, we try to have it, so we can tell each other, we try to listen to each other. I found that helpful, trying to listen, not just think I'm hearing because I'm hearing with the words, but listening that, because sometimes people don't really mean what they're saying particularly. So you're trying to some people don't know how to express things very well, so they're saying something, but they don't quite mean that. So then, I found out that I could, if I just took them too literally, I wouldn't understand what they were saying. I'd get it the wrong way, get the wrong message. So then this listening, like listening inwardly to yourself, it's just a listening, non-judging, but just willing to open your heart and listen without feeling you have to solve the problem or make anything about it. Just listen, just hear it, or towards what's going on in your own mind, and then also to somebody else. Because I notice with, I tend to get reactive if somebody says something, I react, or how they say it, or the words they use, one can just react to it. And then of course there's no, it's just, when you see people doing that, I've watched people doing that, and it's like they're not really listening to each other. They're just like talking like this. Because it's pathetic. Yeah. And I've done that myself. And so when you see that, it's then listening is a kind of opening, and not putting so much importance on the meaning of the words. Because sometimes we make, like if somebody says, "I hate you," is that, oh, terrible, how can anyone say that to me? Because hate is an ugly word. But then when you listen, you're trying to feel what they're saying more than just react to the word hate. So because that's not really what they mean. I mean, I wouldn't take it too literally, but it's like it's something you're accepting that, but you're not taking it in a literal way. So then maybe you're open to what they're really trying to say, what they really want to say, or communicate, or what they're feeling. So like intuition is that ability. I mean, if it's just on the level of words, then of course we just, we just have to, and people use words in different ways. So we don't always know what we're talking about, even though we're speaking English. We can have. I went to a conference once called Mystics and Scientists Conference, and I was one of the mystics, and they had about 3 scientists. And it was interesting, there were 2 mystics. One was a Jewish Kabbalist, and then myself. And then these 3 scientists. One was Charles Tart, who's quite well known. And then it was interesting trying to talk about just the word consciousness. Because, we didn't define our terms before this conference, before this seminar. And so consciousness is a word and we think we understand, but it can mean so many different things to different people. And so suddenly I realized none of us knew, we all had our own definitions. So oftentimes we couldn't quite get what each other was saying, because even with the words, on the level of words, we hadn't defined our terms. But intuition then is getting behind the words, to be sensitive to the feeling, the mood, the other things, because that's where intuitive awareness is this embracing quality. It's a sensitive openness. Whereas when you're just working on reacting to what somebody says logically, then it doesn't require intuition. It just means, ability to argue a point logically. But when you're talking, when you're say working on the emotional level or the spiritual plane, then psychic plane, then that's where the intuition is necessary. Because if you're just operating, if you're trying to be logical on that level, it's not logical. It's not supposed to be. It's not. Yes?
Just to continue on that, if you become convinced that somebody's dumping garbage on you, how do you communicate that to them? Are there some skillful ways to, tell somebody they're dumping garbage on you?
Right, you can, you can say, with a heart filled with metta, tell them to stop. Or you can let them do it. I mean, it's up to you. But if you think that it helps them to do that, and you want to help them, or maybe they just don't know what they're doing, they just need to be told not to do it. But it's more an intuitive response rather than just a reaction to aversion, resentment.
The example you gave of Gandhi comes to mind, because there was an oppressor and a oppressed, and it did seem to work. Where I guess finally the violence kind of just ran out of steam.
Right, and his book, My Experiments with Truth, that was inspired me a lot when I was in the university, because it's the experiment, just to find out what works. And it doesn't trying to be too idealistic about it or too, high-minded and operating from a lot of ideals that might not work at all. But it is, like anything I say, is for your own, it's like suggestions and that for contemplation, for that you can use or not, or experiment with. Like my experiment with accepting somebody's anger, I found that very helpful. Because before I couldn't accept somebody's anger. Or I couldn't accept criticism very well. If people wanted to criticize me, I'd take it too personally. I'd feel hurt, and I'd resent it. So when people wanted to criticize me, then I'd give off these feelings. I don't know if it was intentional or not, but don't say anything that'll hurt me, kind of feeling. So people tended to not say things to criticize me because they didn't want to hurt me. So that's a kind of manipulative ability too. But with this metta practice and then experimenting, I found out that I can take criticism, and when you're open towards criticism and towards letting and willing to be honest and open and receptive to others, then you're working as a different dynamic. And the thing is, it's very liberating in itself.
Some of what people are I think are asking about those. Metta is consistent with activism. I mean, I think Gandhi showed that. And in your own dealing with the right-wing Tory, I mean, you all didn't accept the initial, verdict. You appealed. And so I think if it were clear to people maybe that metta is consistent at times with an incredible kind of activism, as long as that comes from or is done with metta. I mean, Gandhi didn't hate people. Gandhi didn't hate the British or the Muslims or the right-wing Hindus. But nonetheless, he he actually he not only accepted things, he actually, created movements and actions. Just wondering if you could.
Right. Well, his love was concerned for their welfare. He wanted the best for the British. He didn't want to just, get rid of the British through aversion. So I mean, it wasn't. He wasn't just kind of an anti-colonialist terrorist at all. But his movement was to try to do what needed to bring into consciousness the moral obligations of people, and that trying to bring into the minds of the British, what they're doing, and not out of vindictiveness, but out of metta or loving kindness. I mean, this is why, metta isn't just a rubbish, like a garbage bin, but in terms of just a passive receptacle or a doormat that anyone can just walk over. But it's much more an act of love, in which then the responses to situations become apparent. You have when you're mindful, then you tend to have a spontaneity and an ability to respond appropriately to particular situations that you don't have if you're just caught in emotional reactiveness. So there's emotional reactiveness is just conditioned. So you say something and I say something back, we're just reacting to each other. And then you criticize me, and then I say, you can't criticize me, you do things worse than I do, I've seen you. We've done, you see that in the monastery. You admonish some monk and he says, well, I've seen you do worse than that. So that's a reaction. But a response would be more like you're taking in it. Maybe say they're accusing you of something you haven't done, or they misunderstand you, and they're saying these insulting things, and then trust in your, to feel it, and to feel your own tendency to react to it. Then trust in your own response to it, if it's not just coming out of a reaction. Because then there's wisdom in that moment. There's sati, mindfulness, and wisdom, and so that can be, if there is mindfulness, wisdom, then there's the response can be very effective and helpful to both parties. That's where, Gandhi was exceptional in the fact of, in the colonial times, because you could make such a good case against colonial oppressors. And there were terrorists and movements in India that were terrorist organizations that were wanting to just go and kill off the British, just to terrorize them. And Gandhi wouldn't have anything to do with that, because he wasn't anti-British, or didn't want to. He knew that the answer for India wasn't just to get rid of them, but to uplift the whole moral tone of the nation and of everyone involved, both the British and the Muslims and the Hindus and the whole lot. Also, patience is waiting for the right time. Like I notice, if I am impatient and somebody does something wrong or something they shouldn't be doing, and I feel angry or annoyed with them, and I say something out of anger and annoyance, then most of the time that isn't very effective, because then they just say Ajahn Sumedho doesn't like me, because they pick up my aversion to them. So I avoid, unless it's really necessary, but avoid speaking when I'm feeling angry or feeling averse to somebody. And then bide my time, wait for an opening, for the time and place to say something. And of course, in a monastic community, you're giving opportunities for things to be said. So you're trying to create ways of talking and dealing with each other in ways where we aren't just, say, being dysfunctional and just holding back and just, or just blurting things out just as a reaction, but you're trying to develop a way of living in which, say, issues can be addressed, and where the attitude of listening helps. Because sometimes people, if we just react, then somebody says something and we just preach at them. Somebody says, I'm fed up with monastic life. I want to disrobe. And we say, how can you say that? You realize, you've been an alms mendicant, people are giving you alms food, and we say all these things, and then we can give them a party line treatment, make them feel terrible. And so then you try to listen to them, and then people start trusting in you, and they're trusting in the community, that they can say things like one of the nuns told me, she was getting pretty disillusioned with monastic life, and she was always could never admit it. So she was always trying to say, I love monastic life, when she didn't. And then she said, one day she actually told one of the senior monks she hated being a nun, being in a monastic life. And then she began to like it again. But it was like, that's why when somebody says, I hate it, or I hate Buddhism, or that, it's not like that is the, the permanent state of their mind, but it's that's why to react to that would be to I hate Buddhism, I hate monastic life, and I hate the monastery, and then how can you, terrible thing to say, you should be full of loving kindness and all these wonderful things that people do for you, and then you preach at them, and then it just, then it makes them feel put down. Where when they were listening, then they can say the horrible things they're thinking. And that's the kind of, somehow it helps to release that, if we can say the horrible things we think to somebody else. People find that very liberating. like confessions, or saying things where somebody will listen without giving them a lecture, or without looking or hating them or resenting them for saying it. And that's why in loving kindness, that's why we help each other that way, because something is very liberating when I say, I hate you, and then you listen and you accept that, and you don't give a lecture about how they should be filled with loving kindness, and then they don't hate you anymore. Do you find that? Like having... I've noticed this in the monastery, that when you let people say what they're thinking, then even if it is awful or terrible what they're thinking, if they can just say one other person, it tends to, and the other person accepts it and is willing to just listen and not give them advice or not give them a sermon, that seems to relieve the tension that's building up in them. But we're all afraid we're going to get a sermon, aren't we? Say, I hate Buddhism. Oh, you're going to go to hell for that. You'll be in one of the lowest hells, the HE hell for eternity, hating the Buddha. Or and we all know the what we should do, like we should all forgive and love, and these kind of things we already know. But and so on the ideal plane, most people I know in the Buddhist world are very idealistic, high-minded people. I mean, they all, want to be good and the rest of it. So I mean, it's not like you're dealing with, low-minded brutes. Most of like living in Britain now, 18 years. I've never was in England before I was a monk. So I've lived in Britain only as a Buddhist monk. 18 years, I've met, most of the people I've met are very good people. I've not met very many bad people. Now there must be bad people in England, like there are everywhere else. But the life doesn't draw those kind of people to you. And so that. And I've never done anything very bad in England myself. But this is I think very important in a relationship, because people do talk about relationship a lot now, because we're hungry for relating to each other in an honest and open way. And because we're lonely, to be shut off in a world of yourself, and that is a form of misery. So we want to relate, but say, one doesn't know how. I remember for a while it was confrontation, where we're going to just confront each other. What's wrong with you is that you're like this, and then what's wrong with you is you're like that, and then you confront each other with things, and then that can, but you don't know how to really relate. You're merely kind of projecting your own views and feelings onto somebody else. And then confessions and all kinds of ways of just trying to be honest or say what you think or say what you feel. But that can be, if I told you everything I feel all the time, it would, if we had to go around telling each other about all the bad thoughts, negative feelings we have, it would be just so depressing. So that doesn't work. But one thing is say with loving kindness, and then willingness to listen, and to encourage the good qualities in somebody else, and not to kind of always point out their faults or what's wrong with them. So like confrontation tended to be like, well, I'm pointing out your faults, and then you point out my faults. So then we think that being honest is looking at each other, is pointing out each other's faults. Or admitting our own faults. We think honesty is also just admitting our own faults. I have this problem and I'm like that, kind of thing. But why is it that the faults, the weaknesses, we make such a big thing out of in ourselves and others? So that's why I was saying I don't go around pointing out people's faults. I mean, sometimes that's necessary, but generally I don't do that. And then also try to encourage them toward the good. And then also being a friend that listens. And that I found, that's not easy to do, to always listen to somebody when they're saying things that make your guts churn. But you can do it. And it also helps to relieve the build-up tensions and the resentments that one accumulates. Means like in a community life, if you don't bring these up, then there tends to be these underlying ghosts that hang around. There's things that you just never talk about, issues you would never bring up.